Greetings and welcome to another episode of Let's Create Something with Trapcode TAO. Today, we're gonna look at how to create these type of psychedelic mandalas using simple but colorful geometric shapes. In order to do that, we're gonna use a combination of Trapcode TAO and After Effects. Together, we're gonna explore one of the many ways to create that kind of a looping setup, and we're gonna go through that whole process step by step.
Step by step, ooh baby, gonna get to you, girl.
But before we even start to build anything, I'd like to put a word in about where the inspiration comes from, and in this case, let me present to you the featured artist for this episode, Hexeosis from Santa Monica, California. He creates all kinds of super nice and mesmerizing GIFs. If you don't already know him, I would greatly recommend that you take a trip on all these venues here. It's always been fun to see what he's gonna come up with next, and he's been a really huge inspiration for me. Also, I'd like to mention that he has a Blu-ray DVD disc on sale. I'm gonna put down the link in the description down below. So if you were a VJ artist, or even if you just like colorful animation, and it comes with stickers also, let's just watch the whole trailer together because I really think it deserves the attention. So I'm gonna shut up and hit play, and let's just watch this together. Now, obviously, to be entirely honest, what we're going to create today is going to be far from looking as amazing as those animations here that we just saw, but I thought we could explore this kind of graphic style as we create our own, so it'll be our inspiration. So let's open up After Effects and let's start building this by creating a new composition. So let's hit Control N and let's make it 1080 by 1080, and let's make it a duration of 720 frames, just so we can have a little bit of room in the timeline here. And let's create a new solid. So let's go Control Y and let's call this solid TAO, and let's make sure it is the size of our composition. So let's hit OK, and on this solid we're going to apply our TAO effect. So let's get in the effect and preset panel, and let's apply our TAO effect onto the solid. So I thought I would make it easy for this lesson here, and we're going to use the automatically generated path. Perhaps in an upcoming episode I'll make a more advanced version of this. So for the moment, let's open up the path generator, and instead of creating a circle, we are going to make a line. So let's choose line. And to start, we're going to set it up so it is right at the center. So let's type down half the width, half the height of our composition here is 540. So let's type down those values here in line point 1 and line point 2. So now that our geometry emitter is right at the center here, we'll take the line point 1 value and push it in the distance on the Z value. So let's drag this value here, and we shouldn't see anything because in fact it's the back tip here of our triangle here that is moving towards the distance. So let's put something down like 32,000, and let's get to 0.2, and this one we're gonna drag it in the negative value. So as you're seeing now, our triangle extrusion is coming towards our face. So let's have it something around -2,000 as long as it's past us. And let's once again grab our line 0.2 value, and on the X here we're gonna offset it to the left. So let's drag it until we get something like 280 perhaps, and that's gonna be how it's gonna look. I'm gonna hide the layer controls by hitting Control-Shift-H, and the first thing that I'm going to do is make sure that our visibility is high enough in terms of Z value. So right now we're missing out on a part of our line because it's going too far in the distance. The default value of the fog here is 10,000 pixels, and we are going up to 32,000. So let's pick up this value here, 32,000, and let's say to our fog start here that you shouldn't start as long as you're not at this distance here, and we're gonna tell our far value the same here. So let's paste 32,000 here, and right there we can see it all the way until it becomes really tiny because it's super far in distance. And the fog end, let's also paste this value down, and now that we've got 32,000 everywhere, we can start to drag in the fog here, and we'll have control on that. Right now our fog is white, maybe you can use the black color, but let's make sure that we see everything for now, so we're going to keep those values down here. Next, we are going to repeat that in a circular fashion. So let's open up our repeat path section here, and let's open up the first repeater, and we're gonna zero down the R1 world position X first. So let's type 0 there instead of 100, and we're gonna uncheck the symmetric doubler value, and let's start with something like 8 repetitions maybe. And if we want to calculate the right value to put in our rotate Z angle, we've done that before, but let's explain it once again. A whole circle is 360 degrees, so that's what we're going to type down here, but we're going to divide that by the amount of repetitions that we have here. So front slash divided by 8. So we should get something like that. And in fact, we can drop this down to 7 instead of 8, because when the repetition is at 0 we have 1, so in reality 0 counts as 1, so that means 7 counts as 8. If we put 6, we're missing 1, but then 7, and we have the whole 8 pieces that we need, rotated with an angle of 4 to 5 degrees in between each. Next, we're going to change the allure of this thing by going in the segment, and from the segment mode we're going to set this to repeat n-gons, and perhaps in this case we're gonna use repeated spheres, but we're gonna keep it really low poly. So in this case, when our sphere model only has 3 sides, it becomes what's called an elongated square by pyramid. So that's something like a cube with 2 square-based pyramids on each of the tip here. So that's the kind of shape that we have. We can elongate it even more here if we stretch it on the Z value. So let's put something down like 420. Let's make it all flat. So right now we have some shading here because of the default lighting settings, but let's go down to the shader section here, and let's start by setting the shader to density, and let's remove those darker spots here by bringing the normal effect value down to 0. So now they're almost entirely flat, but all that's left that we have now that doesn't make it entirely white is the ambient occlusion. So we're gonna simply shut it off. Now that's what we should be getting here, entirely white pieces. So let's add a texture on that. We're gonna create a new layer, so Control Y, and we're gonna make this layer first. Let's call it text maybe, and let's lock down the aspect ratio, and let's make this layer 512 by 512 and hit OK. We're gonna have a nice square here in the middle, but we'll turn the visibility off later on. Let's add a ramp on that, so let's fetch our gradient ramp effect and add it on our texture layer. And on top of that, let's get to our colorama. Let's add that. Now the colorama is pretty basic. If we go to the output cycle, we'll be able to uncheck the interpolate palette, and then we'll have no interpolation between the colors here, so that's going to be some kind of stripes. Let's apply that on our TAO effect. So let's go back to the TAO layer. We're going to go down to the texture section, and right at the color texture property, we're going to make sure that we assign our text solid, and also on the other drop down menu just right beside, we're going to make sure that we set it to effects and mask. That's going to allow us to apply what's on there right to our TAO object without even pre-composing this. So we're going to be able to keyframe this directly at the same level. And now we can shut down this layer here because we don't need it to be visible, but we can still play around with our settings here. So let's create some black stripes in between each color here, and the easiest way to do that is to click right at the junction point of the colors here on our roulette panel here, and let's select a black color. Let's also click there, and let's do the same in between each of these colors here. And if we make sure that we click right in between the colors, we'll get close to evenly spaced black stripes. And if you want to make those stripes a little bit thinner, let's create another point here for each color, and then we can squeeze the black stripes to make them a little bit thinner here. So we don't need another one, but let's create a third one. So these are always in the middle, and let's try to make it as even as we can make them, but we don't need to be that precise here, doesn't matter. Right there, and there. And let's bring the red one here. So now we have thinner stripes here. And let's animate this pattern. So we could use the TAO effect to do that, but let's see how we can use the input phase here section on this effect. And let's use the phase shift here. So this is a property that we can animate. So let's hit on the stopwatch here so we can create a keyframe on the frame 0, and let's go to frame 90 here. So that's the 3-second mark. We're gonna make it do a whole revolution. So let's type 1 here, and we should get the interpolation in between. So now we have the texture getting displaced along our segments here. So let's close our work area at frame 89 here. So I just went to the frame 89 and hit N on the keyboard. So we have just this space here that we ramp preview, so we can see it seamlessly looping. If we want to have this move towards the other direction, we can simply select both our keyframes here and right click on one of them and go to keyframe assistant, time reverse keyframe. That'll make it go the other way. we can also double this pattern here. So if we go to cycle repetition here, we can decide that we make this pattern loop twice instead of just once. So then we'll have thinner stripes altogether. And that also means that this keyframe here doesn't need to do one whole revolution. It just needs to go halfway now. So we can put, instead of 1, we can put 180, and that'll allow us to have a little bit of a slower motion for the loop. And let's repeat those pieces. So right in the repeat path, we haven't used our second repeater yet. So let's open it up, and let's start by repeating it twice maybe. And here we got a nice pattern because it's offset at 100 by default, but let's zero it down so we can understand what we're doing exactly. And instead of, yes, of course we can do that and get multiple pattern variations here, but let's instead play around with the R2 segment position Y there, and let's drag it down to the some negative value here. And also on the Z here, we can play around with that. And maybe also we can scale them down as they get repeated. So for the segment size X, Y, and Z, let's make it a little bit smaller for those. And we can just play around like this. Make some kind of interesting, cool patterns and shapes. Now let's move forward. Let's have a forward motion. So there's a couple of different ways we could do that. We could make a camera and animate this camera forward, so we move through this kind of pattern, but let's instead use the offset position. So we're gonna offset the position of the segments here along our path. So this is not the size that we want to animate, so we're gonna turn it off, and we're gonna turn on the position. And right here we've done that before, but let's do it again. The little math here we're gonna do for the offset, let's create a keyframe on frame 0, and let's go to the last keyframe here on frame 90, and we have 25 segments, so we didn't even touch this value here. It's still the default. What we're gonna do is we're gonna type 100 divided by, so front slash, the amount of segments that we have minus 1, so 25 minus 1, 24, and let's hit enter here. It's gonna give us a number here, value, that is going to make it loop as we go forward in this, and we're gonna get some nice and cool pattern. But maybe we don't want to get so close, so we can get back to our values here and make sure that we're not increasing it too much. Let's put the position Z in the positive values instead. So let's move forward, and there we have some interesting patterns going on here. We can increase the amount of segments to get more chunks in between. So if we don't feel we have any, let's drag this up a little bit. And now that we've changed this value here, our loop will need to be changed accordingly. So let's hit U on the TAO layer here so we can reveal our offset keyframe that we've just created. And let's go to the second one, and instead of this value here, we're going to do the math again. So 100 divided by 42 in this case, minus 1, so 41, and we'll get our looping value. Now let's try it with the texture evoluting in the opposite direction. So maybe that's more interesting. If the texture goes towards the distance and then the pieces move towards us, we're getting nice hypnotic patterns going on. We're almost done here, and you'll have the liberty to play around with all the other settings if you want, but we'll keep it basic in this episode here. Let's go down to the shader once again, and on the second pass we can add in a second layer of wireframe. So maybe we can color this one red, and let's increase its thickness a little bit right there. And we are getting some lines here on the side of each one of our pieces here. We can remove those by going right in the segment section under tessellate. Let's choose quads instead of triangles, and we'll get less of those lines here. But these lines also might help create some nice patterns and shapes here. And perhaps we can animate the colors for this, so we can be straightforward about it and just keyframe the SP color here, and that's what we're gonna do. So let's go at frame 0 and make a keyframe here. Let's do this quick. We're gonna hit U, and we're gonna hit Shift page down, so we can advance 10 keyframes at once. Let's move 10 keyframes further. Let's go to the yellow, Shift page down again. Let's create another keyframe on the greens, Shift page down. Let's make another one with this kind of blue, Shift page down once again. Move towards the purple, Shift page down, and then let's go to here, and then we can stretch that out so it covers the whole span of our animation. And maybe we can make sure that the last keyframe is red, so we have it looping. And if we play this back, now our line is going to also change color at the same time, as we're getting some weird and cool, interesting patterns here. So you can spend many and many hours playing around with this. Also remember that we have some texture scale setting here, so with the keyframes that we have here, we can change the aspect of our texture here. Maybe not on the scale X here, but we can double it or half it down directly here from the texture scale Y value. That's pretty interesting. Let's keep it at 1, and also just giving you some pointers here, but you can play around with this, maybe change the rotation values. Whoa. And we'll get some different repeating patterns here. That can also be cool. Let's try minus 30 on the X, and now they're super huge, so we can maybe reduce their size. And maybe that's not as interesting. Let's keep it at what we had. That was cool. We can also play around with the segment position factor here, and maybe add up even more repetitions. Have them scale down unproportionally here, or keep it proportional if they feel better when the proportions aren't changed. So that's a fun to be had here, and as I said, maybe I'll come later on with a more advanced version of this technique. Instead of using the automatically generated path, we'll use a light object, and then we'll see what other options we have if we decide to use the AOS offset parameters and stuff like that. But I'll leave it at this for today, and I hope you enjoyed this. So as always, thank you for watching, and see you next time.